Welcome. Today we're going to be thinking about trees together. Amos, my first book, please. Thank you. This is a fantastic book that Steve Cole told me about. It is called The Story of Trees. I really recommend it as a Christmas or a birthday present. And in it says, the white mulberry tree has a notable feature. When the time comes for it to release its pollen, the stamens that produce the pollen act as catapults, exploding and shooting the pollen out at 560 kilometres per hour, 350 kilometres per hour. That is about half the speed of sound. Now, call me negative, but that seems slightly over the top for shooting your pollen out so that they create more trees. That book tells us so many interesting things about trees that go on. And trees, as we saw in the video we watched earlier, are all over the Bible. And I want to think of a few of them. Firstly, the trees in the Garden of Eden. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God doesn't want humanity to touch. He gives them complete freedom in the Garden of Eden and says you can do anything you want, but just don't eat from that tree, because then you'll be like me and you'll know what I know, and you'll have to make the decisions that I have to make. And don't you find people with God complexes have really made a mess of the world? We should have left it to God and lived in God's world rather than trying to make it our world, God's world that we work in with him. And there was another tree, the tree of the knowledge, the tree of life. And God said, enjoy that one, because that one will give you eternal life. Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. And that tree comes up in heaven, in the heavenly city. We hear about the tree of life, the one that guarantees us our eternal inheritance with God and offers healing to the nations, it says in Revelation chapter 22. It's a strong tree, it's a sturdy tree, it's a tree that we can rely on, a tree that doesn't get infected by other stuff, but is pure and holy and gives us the hope that we need for life. And between those two trees, between those two stories in the Bible, there's the tree of Golgotha, the tree on which Jesus was hung. Hang on a minute, Neil, I thought that Jesus was hung on a cross. Yes, but in Deuteronomy, the Old Testament, it says, cursed is the man who is hung on a tree. And that is echoed in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, where Paul writes, Jesus redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. You know, it's interesting to me that many people believe the cross that Jesus died on was made out of a cypress tree. It's one of the reasons in the Mediterranean why we see so many cypress trees in graveyards, in cemeteries, because they want to say, we know that this is a place of death, but also a place of eternal hope. From the tree of Golgotha, Jesus opens a way for us to live under the tree of life, both here and now and in eternity. There's a book please. Thank you. This is a fantastic book. You can read this as an adult or with your children. This particular copy has fantastic artwork, and it is called The Man Who Planted Trees. And the back cover says this: the narrator, journeying by foot across the barren plains of the lower Alps, has his thirst assuaged by the well water drawn by a shepherd. Here begins the subtle parable which weaves the life-giving shepherd who chooses to live alone and carry out the work of God. Over 40 years, the desolate hills and lifeless villages which so oppress the traveller are transformed by the dedication of one man, all with the help of a few acorns. The man meets the shepherd, then he goes away to World War I, and he comes back 10 years after he saw the man planting those acorn seeds in the ground. When he comes back, he sees trees that are beginning to grow. That man, that shepherd, made a difference. How do we live under the tree of life? How can we make a positive difference? How can we plant acorns in the ground that grow into splendid oak trees? Psalm 1 gives us a hint. Psalm 1 says this: blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked, they are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. A person living under the tree of life in Psalm 1 is like a tree planted by streams of water. During the time when the Psalms were collated and put together, the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon. We thought about that on March the 22nd, many weeks ago when we began these online services. And they didn't want to be in exile. Who wants to be? Who amongst us has chosen this exile, this COVID-19 pandemic? We don't want it. But in that exile, they were in Babylon, and it was a flat, barren land. And it had one river. Oi, you, come back here. Thank you very much. It was a flat, barren land, and it had one river that went through Babylon. And what the Babylonians did was they dug irrigation ditches so that they could make the land more fertile. And the Jewish people would be sat by those irrigation ditches, by those rivers, thinking, we don't want to be here, we can't pray here, we should be praying in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, in the city of God, Zion. We can't pray in this exile place. And maybe you've been thinking, I can't live a tree of life in this COVID-19. This is, to put it bluntly, pants. It's rubbish. And God says to the Jewish people in Babylon, live under the tree of life here. You can be like a tree by a well-watered stream. And God says to us, you can pray to me, you can focus on me, you can live for me in this exile period. You can live under the shadow of the tree of life, not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in this period. And so the Jewish people put down roots, and they did grow, and they did produce fruit. In the book, give me the big one again please, son, thank you. In this book, hold it up actually so everyone can see it, smile. You call that a smile? Okay, we'll work with it. In this book it talks about the Ginkgo tree, and it says in the aftermath of the destruction of Hiroshima by the atomic bomb, at least 6 ginkgo trees soon began to reshoot only 1 kilometre, just over half a mile, from the epicentre of the explosion. This seeming miracle of nature enhanced the tree's sacred status in Japan, where it became known as the bearer of hope. In the midst of that desolation, tiny shoots begin to grow up. Who is our bearer of hope as Christians? It's a Sunday school question, isn't it? You know the answer. The answer is Jesus. He is our bearer of hope. In this COVID-19 period, it's Jesus that we look to. Friends, can I encourage you to spend time in prayer, gazing at the Golgotha tree and remembering what Jesus has done for us, so that we can experience a tree of life here and in eternity. In fact, I encourage you, I challenge you, and this isn't new age or weird, find a tree in your garden, on your walk to school or on the way to work, in your high street, that becomes your tree where you can go and pray, and you can look at that tree, maybe this one here, and you can focus on it and pray and say, Jesus, please help me to live under the shadow of the tree of life because of what you did for me on the tree of Golgotha.